The house at Hollowfield. I had been driving through the countryside for hours, the sky heavy with dark clouds that threatened rain. The map on my phone had long since stopped working, and the winding roads seemed endless. I didn't know why I was drawn here to this forgotten corner of the world, but something in me needed it. A break from the noise of the city, from the endless deadlines, from the creeping emptiness that had settled in my chest. Eventually, the trees thinned, and the narrow road gave way to a gravel driveway choked with weeds. At the end stood a house, tall, imposing, and utterly abandoned. Its stone walls were cracked and stained with moss, the windows dark and empty like hollow eyes. I pulled the car to a stop and stepped out into the cool air, the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves surrounding me. The iron gate was rusted and hanging loosely on its hinges. I pushed it open with a creak that seemed too loud in the stillness. The driveway stretched ahead, lined with gnarled yew trees whose twisted branches clawed at the sky. Despite the decay, there was a strange beauty here, a melancholy that tugged at something deep inside me. As I approached the front door, I noticed it was slightly ajar. I hesitated, a cold shiver running down my spine, but the pull to enter was stronger. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of old wood. Light filtered in through grimy windows, casting long shadows that danced with the flickering of the fading afternoon. The house groaned and creaked as if alive, its wooden bones settling after years of silence. The wallpaper peeled in jagged strips, revealing faded patterns beneath. Furniture lay covered in sheets, ghostly shapes in the dim light. I moved cautiously, each step echoing through the vast emptiness. I found myself drawn to a grand fireplace in the parlor, its mantel heavy with dust. On it rested a small music box, its surface etched with delicate flowers. I wound it carefully, and a haunting melody filled the room, a song of sorrow and longing that seemed to seep from the very walls. Upstairs, the rooms were colder, the air heavier. I discovered an old diary tucked beneath a loose floorboard. Its pages, yellowed and brittle, told the story of Isolde, a woman who had lived here long ago, her life marked by loneliness and loss. The entries grew darker with time, filled with strange dreams and whispered voices that haunted her nights. That night, sleep eluded me. I dreamed of footsteps in the halls, of shadows moving just beyond my sight. The house seemed to breathe with a life of its own, its silence filled with secrets waiting to be uncovered. Days passed, and I found myself unable to leave. The house had a hold on me, its sorrow mingling with my own. I realized I was not just a visitor. I was becoming part of its story, another restless spirit caught in its endless night. And in the quiet darkness, I heard my name whispered, carried on the wind through the broken windows. The next morning, the house greeted me with an eerie stillness that pressed heavily against my skin. I woke to the pale gray light filtering through the grimy curtains, the silence so complete it seemed to hum. The wooden floor beneath my feet felt colder than the morning air outside. Despite the chill, I found myself compelled to explore further. I made my way down the narrow hallway, my footsteps muffled by layers of dust and neglect. Each door I passed was closed, some hanging crooked on rusted hinges. When I reached the dining room, I noticed the long table was set as if awaiting guests who would never arrive. Plates clouded with age, silverware tarnished, a single wilted rose lying across a cracked porcelain dish. The feeling of being watched crept back, settling in the pit of my stomach. I told myself it was the house playing tricks on my mind, that the loneliness was gnawing at my thoughts. Yet, as I turned to leave, a soft whisper brushed against my ear. It was unintelligible, more a breath than a voice, but it pulled me towards the far end of the room where a tall grandfather clock stood, its glass face cracked and frozen at midnight. Behind it, the wallpaper peeled to reveal a narrow door I had not noticed before. With trembling hands, I pushed it open. A cramped staircase spiraled downward into darkness. The air that rose from below was cold and damp, carrying the faintest scent of earth and something metallic. I hesitated, the instinct to flee clashing with a curiosity I could not quell. Lighting my flashlight, I descended into the cellar. The space was small and cluttered with forgotten things, rusted tools, broken furniture, and jars filled with murky water. Against one wall hung faded photographs, their edges curled and stained. I recognized some faces from the diary, Isolde among them, her eyes hollow and haunted. At the center of the cellar, a large wooden chest lay sealed with iron bands. The lock was rusted, but not beyond my efforts. With a bit of force, it gave way, releasing a heavy sigh of stale air. Inside, I found letters bound with a faded ribbon, brittle fabrics, and a small portrait painted on cracked canvas. The woman's eyes in the painting seemed alive, filled with sorrow and defiance. One letter caught my attention. The handwriting was shaky, the ink smeared in places. "If you find this, know that the house is not what it seems. Listens. Wait. Isolde's fate was sealed the night the shadows came. Beware the whispers, for they carry the curse." My breath caught. A chill ran down my spine. I hurried back upstairs, locking the cellar door behind me. Yet, as I reached the main floor, I realized the house had shifted. The hallway seemed longer, the shadows darker. That night, the dreams returned. Footsteps pacing just beyond my room, a lullaby sung softly in the distance, voices murmuring my name with a desperate urgency. I woke to a cold hand resting on my wrist. Heart hammering, I sat upright. The room was empty, but the chill remained. The house was alive, and it was reaching out. The days blended into one another, each dawn bringing with it a heavier silence that seemed to suffocate the house and me. I wandered through the dim corridors like a ghost myself, tracing the outlines of memories left behind in cracked frames and crumbling wallpaper. The house was a breathing entity, its pulse the slow creak of floorboards and the distant drip of water echoing through empty rooms. One afternoon I discovered the library. It was a vast chamber, the high ceiling swallowed by shadows, walls lined with shelves that sagged beneath the weight of dusty tomes. The scent of aged paper and leather filled the air, intoxicating and mournful. A solitary window framed a patch of gray sky. I pulled a book from the shelf, its cover faded, pages brittle. It was a collection of poems, the verses speaking of loss, darkness, and the fading light. One passage caught my eye. "Within these walls the past does not sleep. It watches, waits, and in silence weeps." I closed the book, heart heavy. The house had stories, and they were not gentle. That night, the whispers grew louder. Words I could almost understand, carried on the draft that slipped beneath the door. Sleep became a stranger, and with it, my grasp on reality began to waver. Shadows seemed to shift just beyond sight, the corners of rooms bending and stretching like the house was breathing in time with me. In my dreams, Isolde appeared, her face pale, eyes dark wells of sorrow. She reached for me, her voice a fragile whisper, warning me to leave before the night claimed me as it had claimed her. But I could not leave. Something deeper than fear bound me here, a knot of longing and despair twisting in my chest. One evening, I found a hidden room behind a false wall in the attic. Inside, the air was thick and stale, the floor covered in faded rugs and broken furniture. In the center stood a mirror, tall and ornate, its glass cracked but reflecting the room with eerie clarity. As I looked into it, I saw not my own reflection but a shadowed figure standing behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing, only the silent house. The mirror trembled, and a cold breath brushed my neck. I stumbled back, heart racing, and fled the attic. From that night the house changed. The walls seemed to pulse with life, the whispers turning into voices, each one layered with despair and rage. I realized then that the house was not merely a building. It was a tomb, a prison for souls trapped in its endless darkness. And I was becoming one of them. The mornings grew colder, as if the house itself exhaled a chilling breath that seeped into my bones. I no longer felt the warmth of sunlight, only the gray pallor of endless dusk. Days became indistinguishable. Time folded and warped, the outside world fading into a distant memory. I found myself compelled to return to the diary of Isolde, its fragile pages now my only tether to the truth. The words grew more desperate, more fractured. She wrote of voices that spoke from the walls, shadows that moved with intent, and a presence that clawed at her sanity. One passage struck me deeper than the rest. They watch from the corners, unseen but always near. They hunger for the living, for warmth, for release. I fear I am becoming one with the darkness. As I read, the room seemed to darken, the shadows lengthening toward me like fingers. The house whispered again, this time louder, more insistent. I could almost understand the language of its sorrow, a mournful lament, a plea for freedom, a curse born of forgotten sins. That night, I was drawn once more to the attic. The mirror awaited, its cracked surface gleaming with unnatural light. I approached, heart pounding, compelled beyond reason. The reflection rippled, and I saw not myself but a pale woman in a flowing gown, Isolde. Her eyes met mine, filled with an unbearable sadness. "Help me," she whispered, voice like a sigh of wind through dead leaves. Suddenly, the room shook, the walls groaning as if the house itself was waking from a long slumber. The shadows surged, engulfing the attic in a suffocating darkness. I felt hands grasp my wrists, cold and unyielding, pulling me toward the mirror. Panic surged, but my body moved as if in a trance. With a final scream swallowed by the darkness, I was pulled through the glass, falling into an endless void. When I opened my eyes, I was standing in a faded version of the house. Walls cracked, colors muted, voices echoing from every corner. I was inside its memory, trapped between past and present. Isolde reached for me again, her face a mask of torment. "Stay with me," she pleaded. "Together we can break the cycle." But the house was hungry, and its hunger was insatiable. I realized then that I was not the first to be consumed, nor would I be the last. The house at Hollowfield was a prison of souls, and I was its newest captive. And in that shadowed realm, I understood the terrible truth. Some places never forget. They hold on, they watch, and they wait for the next lost soul to cross their threshold. The faded house around me pulsed with a dreadful life, every cracked wall echoing with the whispers of those long lost. The air was thick with despair, heavy and suffocating. I tried to move, to run, but the floor beneath my feet was slippery, shifting like water. Isolde's pale hand gripped mine, cold as the grave. Her eyes, once pleading, now burned with a desperate fire. "You must listen," she urged. "The curse. It feeds on memory, on grief. We are bound by the sorrow of what was lost." I looked around, shadows flickering and twisting into faces. Men, women, children, each trapped in their own silent torment. They reached out, voicing silent pleas that tightened the grip of fear around my heart. "There is a way," Isolde whispered, voice barely audible. "A ritual buried in the deepest chamber. If we perform it together, we might break the curse. But beware, the house will fight." Guided by her trembling hand, I navigated the labyrinthine corridors, descending into the depths beneath the cellar. The air grew colder still, thick with the scent of earth and old blood. At the end of the passage, a stone altar stood, carved with runes faded by time. We began the chant, voices trembling yet resolute. The house responded. The walls shuddered, shadows writhed and screamed in silence, a storm of darkness swirling around us. The very air crackled with ancient power. I felt the weight of centuries pressing down, the sorrow and rage and fear pouring into me. But I held on, drawing strength from Isolde's resolve. As the last words left our lips, a blinding light burst forth, shattering the darkness. The house groaned once more, then fell silent. The shadows receded, faces dissolving into nothingness. I opened my eyes to find myself alone in the front hall. The morning sun streamed through the windows, warm and golden. The house no longer felt alive. It was simply a house again. I stepped outside, breathing the fresh air with a sense of fragile hope. The gate creaked closed behind me, the weight of the past finally lifting. Yet as I walked away, I could still hear a faint whisper carried on the breeze. Isolde's voice, soft and thankful. "Some memories never die, but sometimes they can be freed."